On a freezing winter evening in New York City, an elderly homeless man named Joe sat huddled near a bustling street corner. His weathered hands trembled as he warmed them by a small fire he had made from discarded newspapers. Joe had lived on the streets for years, relying on the kindness of strangers and his unwavering faith to get through each day. He often whispered prayers, trusting that God had a plan for him, even in his lowest moments. Joe's days were filled with struggles, searching for food, finding shelter from the cold, and trying to stay safe in the dangerous streets. Despite all this, he never lost hope. He would visit the local church whenever he could, sitting in the back pew and praying for a miracle. Father Michael, the kind-hearted priest, often reminded him, "Joe, God's timing is always perfect. Keep the faith." One cold evening, Joe reminisced about his past. He had once been a devoted family man with a loving wife and a young daughter. But after losing his job at an automotive factory, a series of unfortunate events led him to the streets. Each Christmas, he thought of his family and wondered if they still thought of him. One night, as Joe was about to settle down for the evening, he noticed a sleek black SUV pull up nearby. The driver, a young man in his early 20s, jumped out and anxiously inspected the engine. Inside the car sat a teenager, none other than Barron Trump, the son of former President Donald Trump. Joe could tell from the boy's expression that they were in trouble. "Excuse me, sir, do you need help?" Joe called out, shuffling toward the car. The driver hesitated but nodded. The car just stopped. "I think it's the battery or something, but I'm not sure." Joe nodded knowingly. He had once been a skilled mechanic before life took a turn, and he had been living in poverty ever since. "I might be able to help," he said, rolling up his sleeves. With steady hands and years of experience, Joe checked under the hood. "Looks like a loose connection." "Give me a minute," he said, tightening a few wires. Within minutes, the SUV roared back to life. Barron Trump, stepping out of the vehicle, looked at Joe with gratitude. "Thank you so much, sir. We were in a hurry, and you really saved us. How can we repay you?" Joe smiled and shook his head. "No need, son. Just say a prayer for me tonight. That's all I ask." Barron reached into his pocket and offered Joe some cash, but the old man refused. "The Lord provides," Joe said humbly. The next morning, as Joe sat on his usual bench, sipping a cup of coffee a kind stranger had given him, a limousine pulled up in front of him. Out stepped none other than Donald Trump himself, accompanied by Barron. "You're the man who helped my son last night?" Trump asked, his expression a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Joe nodded shyly. "Yes, sir. Just doing what I can." Trump extended his hand. "Well, I want to do what I can for you." Barron smiled and handed Joe an envelope. "We looked for you all morning," he said. "Inside is a job offer at one of my dad's hotels as a mechanic. And there's a little something extra to help you get back on your feet." Tears welled up in Joe's eyes. He opened the envelope to find not only a job offer but also a check that would allow him to get off the streets and start anew. Overwhelmed, he looked up at them and whispered, "God is good. I prayed for a second chance, and he answered." Donald Trump smiled. "Sometimes, we are the answer to someone else's prayer." From that day on, Joe's life took a turn he never expected. He found shelter, a steady job, and a sense of purpose once more. Every Sunday, he attended church, sharing his story of faith, kindness, and the miracle that had come when he least expected it. As weeks passed, Joe grew into his new role at the hotel. He quickly became known for his dedication and expertise. Guests would often ask for him by name, and his story spread through the staff like wildfire. Inspired by Joe's turnaround, many employees started helping the less fortunate in their own ways. Father Michael invited Joe to share his testimony at the church. On a bright Sunday morning, Joe stood at the pulpit, looking out at the congregation. "There was a time I thought my life had no meaning," he said. But kindness and faith brought me here today. Every small act of kindness can change a life. As Joe continued to work hard, Barron frequently visited him at the hotel garage, bringing him books and sharing stories of his own dreams. They formed an unlikely friendship, and Joe became a mentor to Barron, teaching him valuable life lessons. Months later, Joe decided to use part of his newfound wealth to help others. He partnered with Father Michael to open a small shelter for the homeless, naming it Second Chances. The shelter provided warm meals, beds, and vocational training for those in need. Joe's work inspired a local businessman, who offered to expand the shelter into a full-fledged rehabilitation center. With the additional funding, Joe implemented counseling programs and job training workshops. One day, Joe was surprised when a familiar face walked into the shelter, his long-lost daughter. She had been searching for him for years. Tears streamed down both their faces as they embraced. "Dad, I've missed you," she whispered. Joe knew that his journey had finally come full circle. Joe's story of redemption and faith spread across the nation, touching hearts everywhere. Media outlets picked up the story, and soon, Joe was invited to share his journey on talk shows and news segments. Through it all, Joe remained humble, always reminding others, kindness is a gift from God, and it's meant to be shared. And that, my friends, is proof that sometimes, the smallest good deed can lead to the biggest blessings.